Hello, everyone. My name is. My book does get into talking about my birth and my postpartum journey and stuff. It deals a little bit more on the mental health side, but it does go into detail about my pregnancy. I host and produce a podcast called Politics But Make It Fashion. And one of the first actually podcast interviews I did was about my birthing story. So I wanted to wait until I was older to have a child. So I waited till I was married. I was in the Navy. I had a career. I had health insurance. The only reason that I'm alive and the only reason that she is alive is because I know that I had health insurance and I had a job that let me take off work and paid me. I had money for gas and I had a car because I had my primary OB and then I had my high risk OB. They were about an hour apart from each other. One was an hour away from my house, the other was an hour away from my job. So my issue started when I was about 7 weeks pregnant. I was actually up here on a trip with the Navy in Harrisburg. I flew back down to Virginia and I was laying on the couch and like the lady said, I thought I had gas. Was not gas. So I had my friend take me to the hospital and that's the first time I ever seen racism in medicine. I was bleeding profusely, 7 weeks pregnant, crying. I was the only person in the waiting room, and they let me sit there for a while, and I was just bleeding on the floor. Finally, when I get called back in, I have a doctor, and he's asking me why I'm crying. Okay, cool, I'm sorry. I guess I shouldn't be crying. He starts doing an exam and it's very painful. I hadn't really had a vaginal ultrasound before. There was no warning. He's pulling out stuff. He goes, "Oh, I'm pulling tissue out of your body." So now I'm hysterical. He's still looking at me like I am insane. He's like, it might be the baby, it might be a twin, it could be you, could be a hot air balloon. He was like, we don't know. We don't know what it is. He said, okay, well, somebody's going to let you know because there's nothing I can do. He was like, you have a hole in your cervix. You can't get sewed up until you're about 20 weeks. I'm still hysterical. Like, I don't actually remember any of this happening. Her dad was there, and I ended up having to call the hospital to get information because, fun fact, nobody ever called me to let me know what actually they were pulling out. Turned out it was just ovarian cyst. But that kind of started the whole process. I had morning sickness the whole entire time. And I ended up losing a lot of weight because I couldn't keep anything down. I had high blood pressure, so I ended up with preeclampsia. Let's all thank Kim Kardashian because that's the only reason I knew what preeclampsia looked like is because I put heels on and my feet looked just like her feet did in her heels. And I remembered that she had a lot of pregnancy issues. And it sounds silly, but she's the only person I had ever seen that had that. And so I knew exactly what it was. I went to my doctor. I ended up having to get a high-risk doctor. I failed the glucose test like terribly. I ended up with gestational diabetes. So now I'm having to shoot myself in the belly with insulin every day. At this point, I'm working 24-hour shifts. So I went to my doctor and I said, can I please wear shoes, not my boots for the Navy? This is the second time I ran into racism. The lady said, well, ma'am, women were pregnant and they walked the Oregon Trail. And I said, I would not have made it past Ohio. Can I please wear sneakers? And I said, I'm not trying to not work. I said, I'll work 16 hours. I'll work 12 hours. I said, just as long as I cannot have to work the full 24-hour shifts. You would have thought that it was her job. A lot of the doctors, you feel like it's their money they're using for the test. It's their insurance. The way that they're acting like you're so much bothering them, like it's theirs. And that's something whenever I get asked a question about what can I talk to doctors about, I say, don't treat it like it's your money or your insurance or your test because it's not. Just run it, right? We'll figure it out on the end, but can you just do it and help me out? So my biggest advocate was my high-risk doctor. And he really, really advocated for me because I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I was on bed rest beginning at 7 weeks, on and off, pelvic rest on and off the whole time. I ended up in the hospital for a month, and it was terrible. Hospital food's really bad. But they were trying to hold baby in for as long as possible without me giving birth and losing her. So we wanted to keep her incubated as much as possible. She ended up being born early. The only thing I really got as far as drug wise, because I was so high risk and I was already doing insulin and stuff, was medicine so that I could make sure her lungs were developed. So I did do the steroid shot, but I didn't want to take anything else. I was a crunchy mom, so of course I wanted like a water birth with my doula and, everything very zen. I wasn't wearing deodorant. I wasn't, I was doing all the things. And then I ended up being in the hospital and they were like, girl, you just need to be happy you're here. So I didn't want to get an epidural because, again, I wanted a natural birth. And I was in labor for about 14 hours. I thought wrongly that once you were dilated, once your contractions were really close together, that you were like good to go. I was 3 centimeters dilated, and my contractions were like every 2 minutes for a good 10 hours. So finally they said, all right, you're about to have a seizure. I started getting really dizzy and I was just really, really hot. So I was like ripping everything off, and they're putting the seizure pads around me on the bed. And they're like, we have to give you an epidural so that it brings your blood pressure down. So this is pretty much probably like around the third time I really had to deal with racism, because I got this anesthesiologist I know he got called from somewhere, and I felt bad. But sir, I've already been here for 14 hours. So the first time he did it, he missed, and he said it was my fault. But again, I was having back-to-back contractions at this point for like a good 12 hours, 13 hours. And so he had to do it again. So I have residual pain still from that. So he did it again. Finally, I actually just passed out. As soon as he did it, as soon as I had no pain, I was out. They said I was snoring. And the doctor came and woke me up about 55 minutes later, and I was 10 centimeters dilated. And I pushed, even though I was on bed rest for most of the time. Anytime they told me that I wasn't on bed rest, I did work out because I was really active before. And I really wanted to make sure that I had as good a birth as I could have, because my pregnancy was really, really horrific. So, I was able to push out pretty fast. She was a preemie and she was tiny because of the gestational diabetes. So she was only about 5 pounds. She had jaundice. They had to take her away. She stayed in the NICU. Because I had insurance, I was able to stay in the hospital for like a week. She was able to stay, and I didn't have to worry about anything. I did get the bill. I would have owed them about $1 million. But I was able to do everything I needed to do, able to get every test, because I knew that I still had money coming in. And my husband at the time, he said, you wouldn't have made it if you weren't in the Navy. And I know that. And I know that I would have just been a number. I would have been that person that had a degree that still had a really bad outcome. And I know that I'm blessed, and I know that she's definitely blessed, but it's something that happens to women constantly. And the amount of people that just don't know that, the amount of medical professionals I've met in this area that have no idea what the Black maternal death rate is, what our health outcomes are. And they make assumptions, because you look at people and you think that, well, you look like you would be healthy to have a baby, and I was everything but. I started off high risk, which I didn't know. I didn't know that I was going to be high risk. And so now I have issues coming from that. I have extremely high blood pressure, a genetic disorder that I believe I might have passed down to her. During that, there was other complications that your kids have when they're born early, as far as needing steroids and stuff for their lungs so they can develop asthma, which is an autoimmune disease, which then connects you to like psoriasis and eczema and all those fun things that you have to deal with. And at the end of the day, we're happy to be here and happy to be alive. And I really hope that my story can shed light and help other people out. So thank you for taking the time. Like I said, you can read more about my story. I have books for sale, and I'm sorry I went over 3 minutes.
Oh, wait,
Sitting there waiting for my appointment and then have to have the energy to say, y'all, I really don't feel good. I think something's wrong. That's just in a realistic world. That's probably not going to be happen. I don't know how many times I fell asleep in there, So one thing also is people being on the phone, people coming into your office on FaceTime, on speakerphone. A lot of times is because they do not feel comfortable, they do not feel safe, and they want to have somebody else there to listen to what you're saying in case you're lying and listen to what they're saying so that they can advocate for that person. So I had seen recently in news that there were some doctors who felt some type of way about a lot of their patients of color and their Black patients being on the phone. But that's why, is you might not have that community right then and there with you, but you'll have somebody over the phone. I was in Virginia, my mom was up here. So a lot of times she was on FaceTime or she was on speakerphone when I was in the hospital, because when I was in the hospital, I was there alone. So that's just something else to kind of keep in mind.
Those of us that are providing care, sometimes it's good to just engage that up front. Like, oh, do you have someone you want to call? I've done rounds where it's like, okay, let them know I'll be around the corner in 5 minutes. Get them on speakerphone because maybe the partner is at work or something like that. And it's hard to process all of that when you're by yourself. And so I think maybe that's a place for us to have space to really think about how do we help have your voice heard. So I appreciate you saying that. I know it can be a little uh, difficult when it's video happening, so I acknowledge that as well. But I think that's where some of those challenges are. For those of you who may not be familiar, I know many of you probably are with, like you mentioned, doulas, community health workers, navigators. Even for those of us who are in the healthcare system, it's a whole thing. Like you said, like I recently had some health issues that I was going through, and it was the same thing. Like, oh, well, we're looking out to 2025. Okay, but something's wrong today, and it's like, I need help. So this is very much a real process. I appreciate you. I'm going to go to Liz first and see what questions have come up, and I'll ask you some questions. Okay, so the first one we've touched on slightly, but we can add to it. How does Geisinger and Maternal Family Health Services support Black, Indigenous, and people of color, marginalized women in NEVA? Are there any resources or programs available you can share with us that we can relate to our community? How do we as community and allies support at-risk groups? Wow, that was quite a question. So, in terms of Maternal Family Health Services, we strive to have healthcare staff, frontline workers who are reflective of the community we serve. And we would very much like to have more individuals who are reflective. So we hope that folks will go to our website and come join us. We're a great organization to work with. That goes without saying. But we also provide training for our staff, and we are very, Kristen probably speak better to this, but because we're a smaller organization, we really know our clients, and it gives us that opportunity to be able to see when something might not be right, when you may not even want to say something, but one of our frontline clinicians check on that. So can I just maybe ask you all to also speak to, do you have to qualify in some way to receive services from the organization? Like, are there certain people that are targeted, or maybe?
So we have actually a bunch of different programs. Obviously, we take insurance, but we also do sliding scale fees. So we go based off your income, and even if you have insurance, if you don't make that much, we actually do a copay. You might not even have to pay a copay. we do have like in-office medications too. So if you're not able to afford your prescription, we do have a lot of medications, birth control options right there in the office. We also we get federal funding right with Title 10, and are you guys all familiar with Title 10? Right. So we also have that funding source for patients who qualify, and we also have what's called Title 20. So some of our patients, they are undocumented, and we're able to provide services for free.
I know in Virginia we qualified for WIC if a lot of rates being active duty. So a lot of the new mothers and families we had qualified for WIC. I mean, if you're in under 5 years, you probably qualify for WIC. So that's another really big pool that I think a lot of people don't know about and is missing. But a lot of active duty service members, they qualify for WIC. They've been under for 5 years. So yeah. I didn't know that when I was in, and I didn't know until I was helping somebody else get it, and I was like,